for inviting me for this. It was about, well, 2005 when I went to the Yoga Shakti mission, and I met a couple there from Titusville who mentioned the Anastasia books. And they spoke about it, and they were talking about how transformative these books were. And of course, I had a flashback instantly to something Eddie Paul will remember, that there was a famous psychic who gave lots of readings from Virginia Beach, okay, Edgar Casey, and he said, out of Russia comes the hope of the world. And that was in 2 of his readings, as far as I can tell. So immediately after I left there from the Yoga Center in 2005, I ordered the 5 books. A question
what
already?
He says? Yes. What he says, I didn't understood what Edgar Case says.
Out of Russia comes the hope of the world.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't understand what I mean, that, but it's okay.
Okay. So in any case, after I heard the presentation at the Yoga Center that night, or that morning rather, I went home and looked up Anastasia, and there were 5 books translated into English. At that time, I was told there were 9 books. 9 was actually 8A and 8B. I found out from 2 people in Europe, since I posted this talk, that there's 10 books. But as far as I know, I've never seen book 10, and it's apparently not available in the United States and England and the English-speaking world. There was a falling out between the Russian group, perhaps. I mean, I don't know all the details, and I'm not going to dwell on that, but I've never heard of there being a 10th book, but you saw it in some of the writing, you put 10 books.
Yeah, on the research I did.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, there are 10 books, but I don't know that all of them are translated into English. In any case, I got 4 of the books out of the 5 that I ordered right at that time, and I started reading book 1, which is called Anastasia. It looked like that. And I'm going to pass this around after I read a few pieces out of here. And I started reading the book, and I couldn't put it down. I mean, I read half the night, and got a little bit of sleep, and came right back to reading again. I read all 4 books in 4 days. They're all about this size. I mean, I don't know if you've ever picked up anything that was that inspirational and spoke to your heart, but it grabbed me right away. Anastasia was beyond anything that I had ever come across before, and she was an amazing human being. Her parents were struck by lightning when she was just beginning to walk, and it killed them. And her grandfather and great-grandfather, both of whom lived over 100 years old, were ancient priests. And I don't mean Roman, I don't mean Russian Orthodox, I don't mean Roman Catholic, I don't mean any organized religion. They were priests of God, I would say, and they lived in the wilderness. They didn't have churches or synagogues or anything like that. And they decided, based on their own inspiration, that they were going to raise this little girl by observation. They were going to interfere as little as possible in her life and put it in God's hands, teach this little one. She grew up with talents, gifts, and abilities far beyond anything I ever heard about, which is why I couldn't put the books down. I mean, I'll share, as we go along in the story, I'll share some of the things that blew Vladimir's mind. Now, Vladimir, the author of the books, was a riverboat captain. He was an entrepreneur in Russia, and every warm season, which probably lasts about half of the year, and the other half is cold, so they have summer and winter, they don't have fall and spring, it's summer and winter. He would take boats, tourist boats, up and down the old river. And on this one occasion, he met the 2 grandfathers. And the grandfathers talked to him about the Ringing Cedars in Russia. And Vladimir didn't know anything about it, but when the winter came and he was back at his home, he began to look up what the Ringing Cedars were all about. and it fascinated him. And so when he made his next trip, he went with the idea, I want to meet the grandfathers again and learn more. Well, instead, Anastasia came out and met him. And bear in mind, she lives in the Taiga, the wilderness area. She doesn't live in a town or a city or anything that's built up. And she came out, she knew he was coming, and she had a destiny with Vladimir. And she met Vladimir and began to take him back to her Taiga where she lived. Well, when she got out of the civilized part of the thing, she got into her normal outfit, which is naked, and he thought that was a sexual advance. It wasn't. It's the way she lived 12 months a year. Even in the wintertime, she didn't wear clothes. And he went to grab her, and she paralyzed him. You don't understand. Well, that first night that he was there, he said, it's cold. Don't you get cold at night? Well, she didn't. She knew how to keep warm. And when he woke up the next morning, he's sleeping next to a bear. And it scared him, as you can imagine. But Anastasia spoke to the bear, and the bear just got up and walked off. Because she understood nature. And she understood fear and love and all those things that we've heard about, but we've never actually seen it put into practice. And by the second or third night, he said, well, I guess the second night, he says, I don't want to sleep with a bear. And she said, all right, I will lay with you and you can sleep next to me. Well, by this time, after being paralyzed the first time, he made no sexual advance to her at all. I mean, here's this beautiful woman laying next to him, and he doesn't take it as a sexual thing. He's thinking to himself, and it talks about this in the books. He's thinking to himself, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a beautiful, intuitive, spiritual woman like this bring a son into the world, or bring a child into the world? And he tells this to the psychologist because he starts telling his story to this psychologist, I think it's in this book, possibly, maybe one of the others, I don't know. But in any case, he comes to a place where he's trying to figure out what happened that night. Because she got pregnant, but he doesn't remember anything. He doesn't remember touching her. All he remembers is waking up in the morning and feeling blissed out of his mind. That's all he remembers. He doesn't remember a single detail of the night that he slept with her. And he spent 3 nights with her and then went on his way. But they conceived a son, Belia. And Belia, when he's about 3 years old, he said, I cannot bring you, can you bring this book to me, the one with all sorts of happy letters, as you put it? This is Vladimir now talking to Belia, their son, Anastasia's and his son. He says, I cannot bring you the whole book, Papa. I could bring you some of the little letters, only why carry them around? It is better for them to stay where they are. If you wish, Papa, I can read you the letters right from here, only I cannot read as fast as Mama. Well, read it the best you can, Vladimir said. Belia rose to his feet and, pointing his fingers out into space, began reading sentences from the chapters of co-creation, God's creation, the co-creation of the world. And he read, the universe itself is a thought from which was born a dream, which is partially visible as matter. And then he continued on. He's reading again from up in the sky. My son, you are infinite. You are eternal. Within you are your dreams of creation. 3-year-old kid, give or take a year. Anastasia raised him, and he was growing up with more talents, gifts, and abilities than she had. And that's another story. But one of the things that Vladimir said, which I thought was quite appropriate, I'm going to read a piece of this. He said, every generation should be stronger and smarter than the one before. That's a logical deduction. And Anastasia said, you are right, of course, Vladimir. But there is an element of sadness when someone is stronger and more insightful than his own generation. And he said, I don't understand what you're talking about, Anastasia. And she didn't reply. She just hung her head. And her facial expression became sad. She rarely is sorrowful or sad, but this time I understood. Now this is Vladimir speaking. I understand the great tragedy of this Siberian recluse, Anastasia. Anastasia, she is all alone, incredibly alone. Her worldview, her knowledge, her abilities are so vastly different from those of other people. And the more pronounced they are, the more tragic is her loneliness. She lives in another dimension of conscious awareness. The other dimension may be marvelous, but she is all alone there. Of course, she could come down to other people's level. She could be like everyone else. But she has not done this. Why? Because to do that, she would have to betray herself and her principles, perhaps even betray God. And then Anastasia decided to do something amazing. She began calling others into this splendid dimension. And there have been those capable of understanding her. And I, it seems, am just beginning to understand her, to really feel. 6 years have passed, wow, okay? And I am only beginning, just barely, to understand. And she has been patiently waiting all this time, calmly explaining everything without getting angry. Perseverant, unshakable in her hope. Christ Jesus was probably the same way. I'm going to read one more, a little bit longer section from page 123. It's interesting. I didn't notice that till just now. And then I'll pass the book around as I continue to talk about some of the insights and the feelings that I've had. During the first 3 days you were with me here in the Taiga. Now this is Anastasia speaking. On all 3 days it was the Vedic school that was exercising an influence on you. And it is certainly not pushy or intrusive. And it does not have any treatises or dogmas. It is capable of transmitting all information through feelings. At times you would get angry or get excited and laugh or become fearful. Every time a new feeling arose in you, new information was taken in. The information was truly vast in scope. It is being revealed only later on, when you remember the feelings it aroused in you at the time. Feelings, after all, represent a tremendous amount of concentrated information. And the clearer and stronger the feeling, the more knowledge of the universe it contains. For example, remember that first night in the Taiga when you awoke and saw the she-bear beside you. Right off, you were frightened. Please take note and think about those words. Right off, you were frightened. But what is this feeling of fear? Let us try translating it into informational terms. What do you get then? You thought, here beside me is a huge beast of the field. It weighed considerably more than my body weight. Its paws are far stronger than the muscles of my hands, of my arms. A beast of the forest can be aggressive. It can attack me and tear my body apart. I am defenseless. I had better jump up and run. To make logical sense of this whole tremendous amount of information requires not just a moment, but a considerably longer time. But this same information, when compressed into a feeling, in this case fear, allows one to react instantaneously to the situation. When one experiences a vivid feeling, a large amount of information passes through man in a flash. It would require a whole scholarly treatise just to describe it, which could take years to work out without the aid of feelings. A correct complex of feelings, sequenced in the right order, can multiply a man's existing store of knowledge by 1,000-fold. For example, your fear of the bear passed as instantaneously as it arose. But what made it go away? After all, it was not natural for it to go away. You were still in the Taiga as before, still defenseless, and the bear was not far away. Besides, there might be a multitude of other beasts out there in the forest. But that sense of fear in you was instantly replaced by a feeling of security. You felt this sense of protection even more strongly than when you were on your boat or in the city, surrounded by armed guards. This feeling of protection came over you just as instantaneously. It came over you just as soon as you saw that the bear took pleasure in carrying out my orders, reacting to my words and gestures. The feeling of protection enabled you to perceive information in a whole new way. A detailed description of everything that happened to you could fill a great many pages of a scientific treatise. And in your books, you have devoted quite a few pages to the animal's relationship to man. But the theme is infinite in scope. In terms of feelings, however, it can be expressed in the twinkling of an eye. But something still more significant took place. Within the space of just a few seconds, two opposing feelings turned out to be in perfect balance. I became to you someone in whose presence you could feel completely protected, even though at the same time, one you could not fully explain and even found a little frightening. The balance of feelings is very important. It is confirmation of man's equilibrium. Man meaning humans' equilibrium. Yet at the same time, as though constantly pulsating, feelings engender more and more streams of information. Anastasia, as I read more and more of these books, encompassed a whole new way of learning about life. We learn about it through the mind and through the thoughts, primarily so. She's saying no. The way that we really learn is by paying attention to our feelings. Now, in our culture, feelings have been denigrated. Well, you're not supposed to feel, and you're certainly not supposed to express your feelings. That's frowned upon and not encouraged at all from the time little kids. Don't cry. Big boys don't cry. What are you crying for? You hurt my feelings. Get over it. You know, how many times have we said this to our own children? How many times were these things said to us when we were growing up? No wonder we live in a world that is fear-driven and fear-based, and we can't touch the miraculous that Anastasia took as her natural state of being, because she was raised without the fear. She was raised to be able to play with the animals and not see them as her enemy. There was no natural fear, but a natural inquisitiveness that allowed her to explore her environment, explore the realities of her life that she was brought into contact with, and it transformed her beyond, as I read. She couldn't relate to people. Vladimir couldn't understand her. Vladimir, at one point, thought, she's using me. I don't get it. She's using me. And he decided to go to a bar and he went with a male friend, and they were going to hire a prostitute. And it was a setup. The prostitute's boyfriend was going to beat them up after they had their fun, and it was all a setup. Yeah, you can have sex, but you're going to get the shit beat out of you afterwards. Anastasia picked all this up psychically. And I don't know how she got from where she was in the Taiga to where he was in whatever city it was. But she shows up at the bar and she defends him. And nothing happened. She went home and she slept on the balcony because she didn't like sleeping in an enclosed area. So she slept out on the balcony and then went home the next morning. On another case, the officials in Russia, after books began to take off and millions of copies were being sold, and now publishers are picking it up because there's money to be made. At first, no publisher would touch it because they couldn't see it, but by word of mouth, it sold thousands of copies. So the Russian authorities said, we've got to get this woman. You know, she's dangerous. And so they organized a party to go and get her and bring her to Moscow. Well, of course, she knew they were coming before they did. When they landed and started setting up camp, she walks into their camp and said, you're looking for me. And yeah, we're taking you back to Moscow. You have some powers and we want to observe you. And she says, well, I'm not going. And one of the soldiers that was there drew his weapon and emptied the barrel of his weapon, automatic weapon, emptied the cartridge, trying to kill her. One bullet grazed her temple and drew blood. By the time that first bullet hit, she had already put up an invisible shield and all the bullets just bounced off the shield. Nothing. And you say, this is incredible. Yes, it is. And you can either believe it or not believe it. She said, I exist for those for whom I exist. I think we all do. She pointed to me something that is more transformative than anything I've ever known. None of my religious teachings, and I've studied all 5 major religions to some degree or another throughout my life. I've made the point to build bridges rather than walls. I have endeavored to do that to the best of my ability. But all of my religious training is nothing compared to the lifestyle that Anastasia demonstrated through her interaction with Vladimir and through the interactions that are told in the books that I've read. And I'm going to try to get a hold of book 10, if it's available in English, I don't know. But I would highly recommend every human being on earth making the investment of time to at least begin the exploration. Start with book 1 or however you feel led to start. I mean, as I said, I ordered 5 books because that's all that were available at the time that I ordered them. And they came 4, 2, and then 1, 1, 1. They have the potential of transforming not only our individual lives, but the world that we live in. I would suggest that Edgar Casey was absolutely right when he says, out of Russia comes the hope of the world. And the hope of the world comes through a lady who shows us a level of being that is beyond anything most of us have ever heard about, and certainly most of us have never even imagined. And I ask you to explore in your own being what you're going to do with the information that I'm sharing with you now that I've shared with you. So at this point, I'm just going to allow you to ask questions or to make comments or whatever you decide, and I do thank you for listening and allowing me to present what I've presented.
Could you mention one about an insight that you got from reading the books that you didn't find in the readings of world religions? What, for example, is one of the insights that you had that was transformative that you hadn't come across before in your other readings? Specifically, you can kind of articulate that.
Even Jesus spent a lot of time in the synagogue, according to the biblical story. And the Buddha had a great big following, and all of them operated in a very different way, the way the world operates, the way that we're trained and we think everything has to be. She did it differently in that she basically lived an isolationist position and developed first and foremost her relationship with God through nature. The rest of the religions didn't do that. And the rest of the religions ended up becoming manipulated by the people in the system and used the religions as a control mechanism to pit people against each other and to create fear that had no answer. Fear of death, fear of punishment, fear of hell, whatever. She put it to a whole new level of, yes, okay, you're allowed to feel fear, but learn to go beyond fear. That's a challenge. That's not easy for us because we've been so well programmed all of our lives. Religion has implicated us or indoctrinated us with an attitude of fear, fearing God, fearing creation, fearing nature. Is that really serving us? That's the question that I had to re-examine as I was invited to speak again. Because this year has been very much in fear for me since I lost my house in February. And I have to say that just coming back in touch with some of this stuff and doing some of the thinking and research on it has shifted something in me. I can't say that I'm where I want to be yet, but there's a shift taking place. And I think that same shift that's taking place in me is also taking place on the planet. And it has the capability of literally changing the world from what we've known to one that we maybe dreamed about in our best dreams, but haven't yet experienced. But I do want to suggest that it might be closer than any of us think. Thank you for your question. Did I answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
As far as you know, she's still alive?
As far as I know, she's still alive. I don't know if she ever had any other children. The Beluga, by this point in time, would be a young man. I have tried to do some research online and find out more. I wish I could tell you more, but I don't know. Again, she's a recluse. Well, Vladimir's daughter took over the business aspect of the whole thing and see it as a money thing, and that's what caused some of the friction between the translators into English. The English translations come out of Hawaii, and the English translations are for